providers continue to reduce their staffing numbers in March at a slight pace. Meanwhile, cost pressures was evident that purchasing costs increased at a faster rate than the previous month. The headline seasonally adjusted business activity index posted below the critical 50-50, no change mark for March, therefore signaling worsening activity in Japan's service sector. Although only modestly, the rate of contraction was faster than the average since the higher sales tax was implemented in April 1 year past, 2014. Panelists mentioned a slowdown in sales volume and a fall in contracts, leading to a decline in activity. Meanwhile, the latest data highlights a weaker improvement of output in the Japanese manufacturing sector in March. The composite output index was at 48.4, indicating a slight contraction in overall activity. The contraction in overall service sector activity was underpinned by stagnation in new orders at Japanese service firms in March. Moreover, total new orders at Japanese goods producers contrast for the first time since May of 2014. Price changes at Japanese service firms rose for the 14th month running in March, according to anecdotal information. An increase in raw materials costs led to service sector providers to pass a greater cost on to their clients. On the other hand, manufacturers reduced their charges slightly, with firms mentioning price negotiations there. And you've seen price negotiations happening in the petro sector, Russian Federation, Venezuela, the Saudis, etc., looking at more long-term contracts, and that affects energy delivery. We'll get to petroleum in a moment here. This is from Amy Brownbill, an economist at Market, which compiled a survey reflecting a stagnation in new business service output in Japan and contrasted for the second month in March. Straight month. Subsequently, service providers reduced their staffing numbers. We already talked about that. And reflective of the overall contrast in business volume, volumes on finished work at Japanese firms were depleted for the first time since December of 2014. In March, manufacturers also reported a fall in backlog in March at a marginal rate. As a consequence, the appreciation of the dollar against the yen. Cost pressures persisted in both manufacturing and service sectors as companies reported a rise in import raw materials. The rise of the dollar has been a problem overall, no doubt about it. Hey, let's move on with these indexes. We have a wealth of data here that we normally don't see, but we'll go to Russia. Their PMI here. This is the private sector continues to contrast. In March, this is HSBC and Market together joining forces for this particular one. After accounting for seasonal factors, the seasonally adjusted Russian composite output index improved to a 3-month high of 46.8. That compared to 44.7 in February. However, a fall in manufacturing production was modest. Service providers recorded a much slower pace of contraction. That means basically the sanctions that are now in place have become part of the economic environment and doing business there. Anecdotal information or evidence from service providers suggests market conditions remain changing, which was highlighted by a marked fall in new business, as was the case with the activity. The degree to which new business fell was much weaker in February. Sectors with the greatest exposure to change in consumer demand, hotels, restaurants, and other services, saw some modest growth over the month. Manufacturers recorded a slight reduction in new business. Russian service providers signaled some confidence that the recent downturn will prove transitory. with only a third of the panelists forecasting some growth activity from the present level over the next 12 months. Companies signaled hopes of a turnaround in economic conditions. And this is across all of these industrial nations. There is optimism, yet guarded. Latest data shows employment falling for the 13th consecutive month, and again at a marked pace despite reductions in capacity. Service providers have suffered spared resources to make significant inroads in their work on the outstanding. Manufacturers also signaled spare capacity during March, both employment and outstanding business being cut at a slower rate. And this is why the adjustment to the sanctions is starting to happen. Finally, input inflation in the Russian service sector remains elevated during March. Reports that business costs were rising. Some panelists made specific mention of higher prices being paid for labor and utilities. Output changes were raised in response to increased operating costs, but the rate of inflation eased sharply to a 5-month low. Manufacturers signal small trends, meaning prices paid for output and average input and average output charged by the Russian private sector rose at the slowest rate for 5 of the 4 months, respectively. Comment here. This is from Paul Smith, senior economist in market. The latest data signaled that the economic environment remains tough, with activity, new business, and employment in the service sector all registering net falls since the previous month. However, these are tentative signs of a bottoming of the downturn being reached, with rates of contraction much slower than in February. Moreover, companies often upbeat assessment. This is very important. The psychology of the economy at any time over the last 7 months. And this we've seen across various nations. They are looking for quote-unquote better times. We'll go to Brazil, an emerging economy, but very strong player there. The PMI slipped to lowest level there. Not very good news out of that. The March PMI index points to further deterioration in the health of the Brazil's manufacturing sector, reflecting a sharp decline in incoming new business. Production fell at the quickest pace since September 2011. The opening quarter of 2015 also saw employment, purchasing activity stocks decline. There were divergencies in terms of inflation rates, whereas input costs increased at a weaker pace. The rate of change of inflation accelerated over the month. Seasonally adjusted, the Brazilian purchasing index plummeted from 49.6% in February to 46.2% in March. This is a 42-month low amidst weak contributions from all 5 of its individual components. Moreover, worsening operating conditions were noted in 3 monitored subsections. Downturns in production volume quickened to the sharpest in 3.5 years, with panelists reporting falling demand, a difficult economic climate. Indeed, incoming new orders contrasted to a sharp rate that was the most pronounced since 2011 in October. New business from abroad stagnated amidst reports of changing global competitiveness in face of robust cost rises. Brazilian manufacturers signal rising purchasing costs for the 5th month in March. Although the weakest since last December, the rate of inflation was among the strongest in the past 12 months. According to survey respondents, the most recent increase in input prices was due to depreciation of Brazilian real against the dollar. Dollars caused a lot of problems here, leading to higher export costs. Output changes, inflation accelerated to 16-month high in March as manufacturers passed it on to clients, part of the additional cost burdens. The rate of change of inflation has remained below that for costs in each of the past 5 months. Faced with lower order book value, manufacturers worked through their backlogs in March. Unfinished business decreased for the second consecutive month. Employment fell for the first time since last November. The overall rate of job shedding was solid and the quickest in 32 months. Cost reduction attempts were often commented by those firms signaling lower staffing levels. The quantity of items purchased fell further in March, with the pace of contraction the fastest since 2011. That is continually pointed out. Reduction in production needs the main reason for drop in overall, in other words, demand. Subsequently, holding of raw materials and semi-manufacturing goods decreased further. Stocks of purchase prices contrasted at a sharp rate, while most of the market in over 5.5 years. Similarly, post-production inventories fell for the third month in a row. The commentary here is from Polly Ann DeLama at the market. March weakness witnessed the sharpest contrast in the Brazil's manufacturing production for 3.5 years, a situation aggravated by difficult economic conditions at home, strong inflation rates, a depreciating currency. Companies indicated that rising import costs affected, this is back to the dollar, their ability to compete at a global level, and subsequent import order stagnation. Also threatening the outlook was a steep drop in incoming new work, the greatest fall in employment since 2012. Moreover, the sector failed to see growth of export orders despite the weaker real there. Lastly, there's little to suggest that we can expect any growth in the sector in the near term. So Brazil is going through a very, very hard time. We'll now come to the U.S. This is the U.S. Final PMI. Sharp improvement in U.S. manufacturing business conditions for 5 months. Output and new orders rebound in March, but export stagnation, and the reason for that is the nations we just went through. Job creation accelerated for February's 7-month low. The summary here is at 57.7 in March. 55.7 in March. We're getting carried away here. Up from 55.1 in February. Seasonally adjusted manufacturers, being purchase managers, PMI registered above the 50% no change threshold, therefore signaling an overall upturn in business conditions, followed by intermediate good producers. Investment goods producers recorded the slowest rise in output and new business volume in March. And the latest survey indicates a robust and accelerated expansion of manufacturing production levels. Anecdotal information cites strong inflows of new business and improved domestic economic conditions. That said, the overall rate of output growth remains slower than the peak since last year. Volumes of new work also increased at a strong pace in March, with the latest upturn the fastest for 6 months. The launch of new products and successful marketing initiatives and greater underlying client demand, and were all cited as factors that new export sales stagnated. Manufacturers indicated greater pressure on operating capacity in March, as highlighted by robust accelerated rise in backlog work. The latest increase in unfinished work was the most marked since September of 2014. Efforts to boost production schedules as